Byron, for those who were like, I don't know, I don't really read books. I could buy a book, but I don't think I would read it. You know who you are. Why would reading be important? Why should we make reading a priority?
Well, I just think it is evident in the Bible over and over again that we're supposed to love God with all our mind. So reading is an act of worship for starters. As we learned at Jubilee, God's creation is good, and so we're supposed to learn and be curious about a lot of stuff. And so learning for life and thinking Christianly and having what the Bible calls a transformed mind is a biblical duty. So for the first reason, not just because it's fun and you can learn stuff and look smart, but it's because you're going to honor God. God calls us to use our minds to love Him.
It's a good exhortation. And our session last night was so wonderful. So I wanted to see if any other books came to mind after the session.
Oh, I am so glad you asked that because I loved Carmen last night, The Goodness of Creation. There is a book that I just want to mention. We talk a lot here at Jubilee about racial reconciliation and racial justice. We're going to talk about the fall today, and the brokenness of the world. But you know, sometimes I think it's wise to remember that our racial and ethnic diversity is part of the creation order. Carmen said that last night. And so there's a book called Beyond Colorblind, How to Redeem Your Ethnic and Racial Journey. And it doesn't so much look only at racism as part of the problem, but it looks at the creation, that we are made who God made us to be in our bodies. So I want to affirm in the sort of doctrine of creation that race matters, but not only because of racism, but because of the goodness of creation and the diversity God wanted to build into the world. So that book, Beyond Colorblind, is a good way to get into that, sort of from last night's perspective through the lens of creation.
Okay, that's a good word. So as you mentioned, we are this morning talking about the fall of where things went wrong. So I know you've got a lot of books to lead us through that. So let's think about specifically in the areas of mental health, the way the fall can impact our emotional and mental health. What books would you recommend on that topic?
Well, there's a bunch, and we have a whole lot back there on people that are just struggling with anxiety or what have you. But there's a book called, it's called This Too Shall Last. And This Too Shall Last is by a woman named K.J. Ramsey from down south, I think, near where you live. Great writer, and it's about chronic pain, about some sort of toxic relationship she was in her church. It's about finding grace when suffering lingers, is the subtitle. I just can hardly name a better book on sort of coping with your own emotional and physical brokenness in this world. There's another one that's called Companions in the Darkness. It's right next to it here. The woman that wrote this has been to Jubilee. She was raised up as a student, got this vision from the CCO of this all of life reading, but went through some serious clinical depression. And she wanted to figure out how to navigate that with the hope of the gospel. And so get this, she looked at people from church history that you don't usually hear about their sort of hard side. Martin Luther, Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, a whole lot of people, famous and missionaries, that we need to know about from church history, so you learn something there. But they all coped with depression and struggle and doubt. And so she tells their story. It's called Companions in the Darkness. Very, very useful to kind of get at that sort of stuff. Another one that is a must, and you know this author, Kurt Thompson, The Soul of Shame. Isn't that a great book?
Mm-hmm.
He spoke at Jubilee Online virtual last year as one of the keynote speakers. And I think this is a book almost everybody could benefit from. It shows how in the history of the Bible, the Satan is trying to hurt us and does that in Genesis by introducing shame. And so this is retelling our stories and coping with this biblical problem of shamefulness. It's a great, great resource and very important.
Yeah, that sounds so important. So then how about as we're looking outward and we're seeing the effects of the fall on our relationships, the ways that we engage with the culture and with each other, what would be some good books to help us explore that?
Well, you're really right about that, because some Christian traditions just view the brokenness of the fall and sin as a personal matter. But the Bible and Jubilee is very clear that sin is not merely in your own little heart, but it's in this whole world. Every square inch that is so good is also broken and distorted. So we have to look at the idols of the culture. And we're going to put up a slide about the book that I'm recommending here. It is called Here Are Your Gods. Here Are Your Gods. It is looking at how to be biblically faithful in a culture of idolatry, where the culture itself has become distorted. This is one of the better books about how, particularly at this moment in American culture, there are idols in the land, and we have to be faithful and discerning about that. I think that's a really important book.
Yeah, what else would you have?
Well, there's a book called Voices of Lament. And I love this book because it is a group of women, all different kind of women of color, all different ages and from different places, writing on one particular psalm. And they offer a psalm of lament, a cry out of brokenness. In fact, our own Marlena Graves, who is doing a workshop on Sunday, has a chapter in here. Great writer, Marlena. This Voices of Lament are women of color reflecting on this psalm that gives voice to brokenness. Some of the pieces are poetry, some of the pieces are creative writing, and some of it's biblical teaching, but it's Voices of Lament. It's a really, really useful book for men or women of any color, but it is Voices of Lament. Yeah, good work.
Okay, and then thinking about, although God created racial diversity to be very good, in our fallenness, it creates divisions as a result of sin. So what would be a book that you would recommend?
Well, Voices of Lament is a good way to begin to get at that. I think as college students, one of the best things we can do to understand the sin and brokenness of our culture is understanding the history of the idols, how we got into the mess. I'm not a history major, although John Fee is doing a workshop on history here. Knowing the background of racism is so important in our culture. There's a book called The Color of Compromise by a brother named Jamar Tisby. He's working on his PhD in history down in Mississippi. And this is the truth about the American church's complicity in racial discrimination from the earliest days of the country until now. I don't think I can name a better book on the history of the problem of racism. And this Color of Compromise is really important to understand the fall as it's impacted in our time.
That's so wonderful. Thank you, Byron. There's going to be so many more titles. There's so many ways that the fall impacts the world. So you're just going to have to ask Byron.
But we've got to talk about these other two. There's one that you forgot. Learn for the Love of God is a book that was written by Don Opitz and Derek Melleby. I was just in Derek Melleby's workshop this morning, and it was spectacular. He wrote a book called Make College Count. But this Learning for the Love of God is for college students, and some of you heard Don in his workshop this morning. There were people standing out in the hall on how we can use our college experiences, discerning our gifts, loving God with our mind, figuring out how to relate faith to learning. If this idea of sort of learning about Christian thinking in your major and your academics is new to you, this is the book for you. It was created, in fact, out of the Jubilee Conference, because the CCO wanted a book that was not hard to read, that was fun, that explained this vision. It happens to be dedicated to me, so I'm honored to tell you about it. Learning for the Love of God by Don Opitz, Derek Melleby. See you down at the book room.
Thank you.